So, good morning and happy Independence Day. Obviously, the lectionary for the Universal Church is not chosen based on something happening just here in the United States. So, our readings today are not about America or independence or anything like that, but they might have some relevance for how we think about ourselves and how we think about our country. Today's readings, they're both the first and second reading, to me feel like they're a lot about fear. In the first reading, we have the scene of leaving town before it gets destroyed, and this scary moment was, to me, it was always terrifying as a child, of Lot's wife turning back and getting turned into a pillar of salt. That was always scary, the idea that you just did something wrong and looked the wrong way, that suddenly you'd be turned into a stone. And then in today's gospel reading in Matthew, which is what I'm going to focus on, we have this moment where they get into a boat. Jesus and his relatively newish disciples at this point get into a boat. They're crossing the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is having a nap. And all of a sudden, the winds pick up, and they wake him up, and he gets kind of mad at them. I sort of love this scene. Because it seems like Jesus is kind of annoyed. He's been up all night healing. He's been up all night exorcising demons. He just wants to get a rest. He's dead asleep in the boat. And when the boat starts getting swamped, his disciples say, "Lord, save us, we are perishing." And he just wakes up and he's like, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith? Calms the winds, calms the waves." And I like, in my own mind, I like to imagine that that's the point where he goes back to sleep for another well-deserved rest. This teaches us maybe something about our own fear, and about God's presence with us in our fears. What seems terrifying to us might not be terrifying to God. We have this moment where Jesus is, again, a little annoyed in a way that I find deeply endearing, and yet at the same time we have this moment in which he calms the winds, he makes things better, he asks us to trust him. He asks us to trust him that in the midst of all this, that he's in charge, that God's in charge. And I think that might have some relevance for how we think about ourselves today in the United States on Independence Day. I mean, one way to think about this is we're all in the same boat. We might be afraid. We might be afraid about the conflicts are in our world or in our country. We might be afraid about the heating of our world that we're seeing more and more every day. We might have some good reason to be anxious, and we might feel that deeply. And yet we're somehow all in the same boat together. Somehow that's part of our journey. And the big difference here that is part of our belief in the incarnation, our belief that God really became present with us in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, is the idea that God isn't, I'm sorry, Bette Midler, God is not watching us from a distance. God is with us in the boat. Jesus is with us in the boat, experiencing it, and at the same time wanting to reach out to calm some of those waves, or more accurately, probably to calm some of our fears in the face of those waves, in the face of those winds. So today's Independence Day in the United States, but in some ways our Gospels today, our readings today about fear are about our dependence, our dependence upon God, who's really the one in charge here. Our dependence upon Jesus, who's the one who is able to show us that, yes, it's okay to be afraid, but at the same time, he's there with us, even as we're terrified, even as we think we're perishing. So we might ask today to pray for a deeper sense, not just of our own fears, not just of our own anxiety for what happens next in our lives, in our church, in our country, but ask for some of that trust, ask for some of that faith that allows us to feel, or at least to know Jesus' presence with us here in this boat. And so, happy Independence Day, but also happy Dependence Day.